Hello, it's a pleasure to welcome you to this edition of Off the Shelf, a book discussion series brought to you by the Conference Board. I'm Chuck Mitchell, and I serve as the Executive Director of Knowledge, Content, and Quality here at the Conference Board. Today, I will be sitting down with authors Arthur Yeung and David Ulrich to discuss their book, Reinventing Your Organization, How Companies Can Deliver Radically Greater Value for Fast-Changing Markets. Dave Ulrich is the Rensis Likert Professor at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business, as well as a partner at the RBL Group, a consulting firm which focuses on helping organizations and leaders deliver value. Dave has published over 200 articles in book chapters and over 30 books. He edited Human Resource Management from 1990 to 99 and also served on the editorial board of 4 journals, on the board of directors for Herman Miller, and board of trustees at Southern Virginia University. And Dave is a fellow at the National Academy of Human Resources. Dr. Arthur Yeung is Senior Management Advisor for Tencent Group and Dean of Tencent University. He's also the founding president of Y Triangle CEO Consortium. Previously, he served as Philip Chair Professor of Human Resources Management and Associate Dean at SEABS from 2004 to 2013. He has published 15 books, and prior to joining SEABS in 2004, he served as the CHO of Acer Group, working closely with the chairman in organizational transformation and leadership development. He has served as board member for 7 corporate boards and 2 not-for-profits. In Arthur and Dave's latest book, Reinventing the Organization, published by Harvard Business Review Press, readers are shown how to build a new kind of organization, what they term as a market-oriented ecosystem that responds to changing market opportunities with speed and scale. Welcome, Arthur and Dave, to today's program.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. What a delight to be with you, and for me again to be with Arthur.
Oh, it's certainly great to have you. I thought the book was a really good and interesting read. So let's begin with this conversation.
We hope you can tell. We hope you can tell which one of us is speaking by the accent. That was a joke.
Got it. So let's begin this conversation with the following question. In your latest book, you discuss how companies need to reinvent themselves to compete in a constantly changing business environment. From your point of view, what does reinvention mean? And how is this new way of competing different from transformation or breaking down hierarchies? Dave?
Chuck, lots of companies have experimented in how to rethink organization. And the reason why is so simple. In our research, we have found that organization has 4 times the impact on business results than individual talent. So when you bring people together in a collective, collaborative way, they are more successful than as individuals. And so people have said, we know hierarchy doesn't work. It's bureaucratic, it's top down, it's slow. What's the new organization? And dozens of people have created cool ideas: exponential, ambidextrous, holacracy, amoeba. What we see in almost each of those are pieces of a bigger puzzle. And so what Arthur and I set out to do is to define, as Arthur says, a new species. And it isn't just the hands or the feet or the heart and the head, a piece of an organization. It's the whole species. And when we reinvent an organization, we're not just talking about structure or performance or team. We're talking about the entire species. And what we're finding is is a new organizational species or form that's beginning to respond to the incredible outside change and pressures that we see. And that's what Arthur are trying to figure out and to stick over.
Great. So you talk about this market-oriented organization. Why do you use that term when defining successful transformation?
Yeah, again, I think echoes Dave's comment. The environment we are facing now is what we call VUCA. So in order to be more agile, customer-focused, and innovative, we need to organize very differently. So when we throw the term market-oriented ecosystem, it's an old word term, but we think it captures the essence of the organization we want to articulate. When we say ecosystem versus hierarchy, it means how the future organization should organize to become much more focused and agile. Instead of hierarchy, we organize by platform, plus small teams, plus ecosystem partners. It's more like elite special force. You have some kind of agile teams facing the market, facing your customer, but you have strong back platform to support critical resource you need. When we say market-oriented, it means how it operates, how it works. It's more related to the software, not the hardware. So we hope the organization, everyone is focusing on external market opportunity rather than internal bureaucracy. So that's how we articulate the idea. Again, we think this organization will be much better to adapt to the new kind of environment because it creates greater value to customer, employee, investor by being much more customer-focused, innovative, and agile.
Thanks, Arthur. That raises an interesting point. So we understand the theory behind the market-oriented ecosystem, but companies have their traditional organizational models in place, the hierarchy, the systems, capabilities. How does an organization move towards this new organizational structure or form?
Chuck, it's not easy. Change is really tough, especially when you've been successful. Because a successful hierarchy, a successful set of aligned systems, or a successful capability get locked into what we've done. And great and being good is the enemy of change. And yet, as Arthur said so well, we live in a changing world. And so how do you do a new thing? We identified 6 features of this new organizational species. And again, I don't want to bore people with it, but they're really pretty simple. There's an environmental outside-in look. Number 1. Number 2, there's strategic agility. Number 3, there's building ecosystem capabilities. Number 4, as Arthur said again, there's morphology or structure. Number 5, there's governance to operate. And number 6, there's leadership. What we've done is we've said, look at those 6 things and answer 2 questions. Number 1, how well do we as a traditional company do those today? 1 to 10. Are we good at environment, strategy, morphology, capability? Question 2, to divide 100 points across those 6, which of those 6 are going to have the biggest impact on our success? I'll reinforce it because I went over it quickly, but it's such a key issue. The organization has 4 times the impact on business results than does individual skill. So which of those 6 factors, environment, strategy, ecosystem capability, morphology, guidance, or leadership will have the most impact on our ability to succeed? When we ask those 2 questions, we can begin to say, here's the ones where we need to improve, governance, morphology, and here's the ones that will have the most impact. And by navigating those 2 things, how we do and where the impact is, we can pick the priority of how we can begin to adapt and change.
Thanks. Arthur, let me ask you this question. So how does an organization define a pathway for growth within an MOE? What's the modalities here?
Well, actually, when we study MOE, what is fascinating to us is they are very future-oriented. They focus on creating new market opportunity rather than focusing on current market share. They are growth-oriented, future-oriented, external-oriented. If you look at 8 companies we studied, 5 of them are in the top 10 most valuable firms in the world. So that fascinates us. If you look at those companies, we find that they always have a clear pathway for growth. And there are 3 pathways for growth. Let's take Amazon. The first pathway for them to grow is around customers. They are doing it by growing. Their growth is focused on selling to more customers. They start with self-owned, self-operated bookstores, and later on they add into more categories so that they can add more customers to buy. Again, Amazon key value proposition is to offer to customer with more selection, better price, and greater convenience. So that they grow by having more customers. Later on, they target a group of what we call Prime membership, also create much higher revenue per user, per customer. So first of all, they target growth around customers. Secondly, they can grow around regions. They start from US and then they go to Canada, Germany, UK, etc. They go outside US. And third, they can also grow around adjacent business, especially if they start with bookstore, and then later on they add into many categories, like electronics, fashion, shoes, CD, etc. Later on, they expand into marketplace by selling other people's product. But in order to help those companies to operate in Amazon Marketplace, they offer fulfillment by Amazon, AWS, and then later on they add into a whole bunch of what we call digital contents, smart device, and then recently they also use their online technology to revamp traditional retail environment by acquiring Whole Foods and also experimenting with Amazon Go. So we think when we look at all those companies, we can see a clear logic around their growth strategy. They can grow around customers, regions, and also business.
It's a really good point, and this notion of the sum being much greater than the parts is I think is fascinating for me. You categorize 6 major types of changes in an external environment. It's kind of social, technical, economic, political, environmental, and demographic. So what is the impact of these on the future of work, and how can companies get ahead, get better recognize and respond to and shape that impact coming from these changes that are hitting them on all sides?
Sometimes, Chuck, what we find is that people get threatened and scared of the outside environment. And I'll confess, I've had that. The pace of change in technology, my kids and someday soon my grandkids have technology skills I don't have. And I get threatened by that. I get scared of it. What we did a number of years ago is I worked with a company that had business in over 80 countries. And the senior executive said, we visit these countries and we're given a tour. And everything's wonderful, we're wined, we're dined, and we don't really understand that country. How do we get deeper into what's happening in a country? That's where we came up with the 6. When you can say, here's the social, technical, economic, political, environmental, demographic changes going on in Turkey, in Indonesia, in Japan, in Buenos Aires, in Canada, in Mexico, in China, in India, in the United States, that gives you a template that lets you look at the changes outside in a country or in an industry, and now you can anticipate change. You're not going to be threatened by it. You're going to be invigorated by it and say, here's a change happening in the political setting that will give us an opportunity to do the future of work differently. Without understanding the context in which we live. In fact, people have said, content is king. You got to have good content. Context is the kingdom in which the king works. And without knowing that context, we're going to be random, and the future of work doesn't have a direction. And so we really encourage business executives to understand their context in those 6 areas and to anticipate what changes might be coming.
Yeah, I think...
And I think this is important. This is the step or the foundation of reinventing the organization. Without recognizing the future environment is changing, there are a lot of new opportunities going on, a lot of threats going on. Organizations oftentimes are reluctant to change because they're in comfort zone. They look at the past rather than the future.
Yeah, I think it's that notion of thinking global, acting local, right? A bit of a cliche, but not understanding. I think the business landscape is littered with initiatives coming from head office that fail to be culturally sensitive or take in the nuances within those countries, and the global rollout of those programs have led to failure or inaction. So I think it's a really good point, understanding a holistic view of the environment and the changes impacting specific regions. So we're going to take a short break now for some quick announcements and be back in just a minute or so to continue our conversation with Dave Ulrich and Arthur Yeung on their latest book, Reinventing the Organization.
Can you, your team, or your company benefit from insights such as the ones provided in this podcast? They are immediately available when you join the Conference Board, a membership-based think tank that delivers trusted insights for what's ahead. Reaching across industries and geographies, we bring together our noted experts, senior executives from the world's largest companies. and nonpartisan practical research to help you address your most important business issues. Our membership packages are tailored to your organization's unique needs and budget. To learn more about our offerings, go to www.conferenceboard.org and click Join on the top bar to connect with one of our product specialists.
Hello, and welcome back to our conversation with authors Arthur Yeung and David Ulrich on Reinventing the Organization. Dave, when we left off, we talked about how companies can and must transform themselves and move towards a new organizational form in order to thrive. Of course, this can't be done or can't be accomplished without the help of organizational and HR leaders. So, what are the serious questions that organizational leaders must ask themselves and their teams when embarking on this reinvention?
Let me take a cut on organizational leaders first, and Dave may want to jump in about HR leaders. And I think for whenever we talk about reinventing organization, this is a massive, holistic transformation. So I think, again, before the break, we talk about the question number one is leaders must understand why. Why is there a need to evolve our organizational model into a new kind of species, which is much more agile, much more flexible, customer-focused, and innovative? Usually, the real needs come from if we stick to the current model, the current way of doing things, we are going to die fast, or we are going to miss huge opportunity. Even though we see new opportunity, we fail to grab it. So there must have a basis. Why? Why bother to change? After we answer that question, the second question is where? If we want to go to change, what kind of business, what kind of organization will look like in the future? In terms of which growth we want to move into, and then what kind of organization, how does it look like? So that's the second question. Leaders need to build consensus and a shared view. And the third one is how to get there. If we know the destination, then how are we going to move there? Again, we talk about the 6 steps roadmaps. In our book, we have a lot of tools. We have a lot of stories. And those tools are designed for top leaders to build consensus, to have a dialogue, so that they know how to get there, where to start with, and how to get there. And finally, I think it's very important is how can we increase the chance of success? My personal experience is that for this kind of large scale of transformation, in order to be successful, the conviction of the top leadership team is very important. Do we really need to change? If there's not, and then that kind of change will be beneficial. If you don't have that kind of foundation to start with, always hard to sustain change. The second key thing is you need to increase confidence of the team along the change journey. So quick wins, quick feedback, quick dialogue, adaptation, adjustment are all important points, I think, for the leaders to think clearly when they undertake that kind of large-scale transformation.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think, one of the challenges that are facing business leaders today is really encouraging, creating, building that culture that empowers, energizes, and orients employees, right? So how does an organization define the right culture for their teams?
I'd love to talk about this because I think the concept of culture has been around for a long time. I was in Europe a number of years ago and said to executives, you should invest in the culture. And they said, we do. We go to the opera. and culture was this social agenda. I think folks have recognized that culture is what you see and feel in an organization. So when you walk into a hotel or a restaurant, you feel and see that culture. And I think in legacy, culture was defined as the internal set of values. We value innovation, we value collaboration, we value service. What we're finding in the work that we've done is that you need to shift that. Those internal values are wonderful, and nobody can disagree. But what's the value of those values? And so we define culture from the outside in. What is it we want to be known for in the marketplace? So if I'm at the conference board where Chuck works, what is it we want to be known for by our members and those who use our services? Thoughtful insights, rigorous research, relevant research. That external identity then begins to create a set of internal practices. So the right culture is more important than a culture. It's not having a set of values. It's having the values that create value for our customer. And unless and until we get the culture inside linked to the values outside, which often start with your brand or your reputation, we don't have a right culture. We have a set of good things to do, but they don't create value. And so we believe that in these new market-oriented, outside-in companies that are successful, they define culture from the outside in. What do we want to be known for by our key customers? How do we then make that real inside to our employees? We can give a lot of examples of that, but that is turning culture on its head. And we have to confess, some of the traditional folks in culture get really angry with us because they say, oh, culture is how you think, feel, and behave. And we say, no, that's 40 points out of 100. Culture is how you think, feel, and behave so that customers will be more inclined to do business with you, or so that investors will be more inclined to invest in you. And until we connect the internal cultural values with the external brand identity or reputation, it becomes almost an irrelevant point.
Yes. So that brings, up the question that, leaders and employee resilience to change. And so how can leaders help employees experience that positive impact of the rapid change and encourage them to kind of recognize those industry disruptions and remain agile and nimble to capture market changes and opportunities?
Let me take that one as well, Chuck, if I could. And then I'm going to ask you, do you want me to go first or do you want to go first?
No, go right ahead.
And then I'm going to see what you would think, because I think you sit on a really unique perch where you are at the conference board. But there's been an evolution of how do you build sentiment with employees. We talked about motivation decades ago, then commitment, then engagement. The new buzzword today is experience. And in each of those pivots in evolution, we're trying to find a way to get the employees to get more connected. And it's no longer just do you have the skills, are you showing up at work, but do you show up with your heart and soul? The organizations Arthur and I studied had a preponderance, not all, of course, of employees who showed up not just with their minds, their behaviors, their hands and their feet, but their heart and soul. And here's 3 things we found. Believe, become, and belong. Believe. Employees found personal meaning in the work that they did. This is not a job. This is a belief system. Become. Employees became better. They had, in the lingo today, a growth mindset, a way to grow, a way to learn, a way to become better. Believe, become, and belong. They felt like they were part of a tribe or a community. They identified with the firm and what it was trying to do. And so for us, the evolution of that motivation, commitment, engagement, experience is moving towards help the employees find believe, become, and belong in the work that they are trying to do. Chuck, what are you finding in that area? What are you finding that's new around the employee experience?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly, and especially with newer generations in the workforce, that our members really do focus on mission, creating that purpose within work that really drives high engagement. And I think one of the other interesting notions, especially when we talk about digital technologies too, is when you go out into the workforce and hire a digital skill, if you can find it, right, that skill in 18 months or 24 months is probably outdated because the technology has moved on. So do you need to start to look to recruit for attitude, for that continuous learning mindset? And then really, how you help people overcome that change is giving them the opportunity to continue to grow and develop, but real resources into this continuous learning. I think a lot of organizations pay some lip service to it, but to actually put real resources against it, give real time for the workforce to continue to develop, keeps them engaged and allows, opens up the market and the ability to change, to capture those opportunities. So that's the kind of one thing that we see.
By the way, I love what you just said. Go ahead, Arthur. No, let me finish, Arthur, real quick. And then,
go ahead.
No, Arthur, because what Chuck just said is meaning, that's believe, become, that's the learning and growth and hiring people, not because of their technical skill, but their capacity to learn. That's the stuff we see these new organizations creating that inspires the employees. Arthur, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's exactly the beauty of MOE, the one we're talking about. It's pretty much you want to create a lot of opportunities for people in the front line who understand the trends, who understand customer needs, who understand technology, can quickly form a team, focus on the opportunity, using the platform. They can experiment, they can grow. So along the process, all of them have an opportunity to grow, to become. And then they also have a mission that they want to make a difference, to change the world and to serve their customers much better. So that's why we think MOE is a much better organizational setup than traditional hierarchy that stifles people, lock people in bureaucracy. That's why we think it should be a better form of organization to let employee experience the impact of changes.
Right, and that's a good point. So, we've kind of touched on this notion of bringing in the talent for attitude, if you will. But, how do HR departments and leadership teams learn how to bring that right talent in? And then once it's in, nurture it, move it throughout the organization or the company's ecosystem. That's a big challenge, the notion of talent mobility, right?
Absolutely critical. I'll take that one. I enjoy working with HR. I think there's 3 steps in that. One is bring the right people in, and increasingly it's hire for cultural fit. Remember, culture is outside in the mind of the customer. Train for technical skills. So it's not just when I hire someone, do they fit what I hope my customer has? We don't want to be the employer of choice. We want to be the employer of choice of employees our customers would choose. Second, once you get them in, move them through the organization, train, develop, mobility, give employees opportunities to learn and to grow. And third, really work to retain the good ones. Really work to say, boy, you're talented. How do we keep you? How do we keep somebody in a research knowledge job for 20 years? And that's becoming part of a team. By the way, the other thing we say is if somebody is not performing well, we've been asked a lot, what's the most strategic talent decision you can make? And we've got one. It's taking your worst performing employee and placing them in a competitor and saying to that employee, do exactly what you've done for them. Again, that's a joke, but we want to retain the good ones and remove those that don't fit. So bring them in, move them through, and then retain and remove appropriately.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I know the one thing that we often hear is that there's some often pushback on, well, we keep putting resources in and continuously upskilling people, and then they leave, and the retort is always, well, what if we don't do that and they stay, right? That's the big problem, right? So
and the other thing is that one of the greatest sources of talent is the good employees who've left. We are finding thoughtful companies saying, it used to be, I worked with companies a while ago and they'd say, oh, if you leave, you're disloyal. We don't trust you. We don't love you. No, if you leave and you're good, we'd love to have you come back. And sometimes that rebound hiring or whatever, boomerang hiring is often a source of talent that's underdeployed.
Yeah, that's a good point. So in your research, you focus on several successful global companies, Amazon, Alibaba, Tencent, Facebook, Supercell. Though all these companies have different stories and they come from different industries and regions, what are the common threads that lead to their success? And what can other companies take away from these examples while in the process of their own reinvention?
I think there are several common principles or phenomena we see for all those successful companies. First of all, they all recognize that the environment is becoming what we call more VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And mainly driven by technology, especially product technology and digital technology, that make the whole landscape much more volatile and uncertain. And so they know that in face of this kind of environment, in order to win in this kind of environment, they need to be much more truly customer obsessed, rather than competitor obsessed, rather than leaders obsessed. Many of them talk about customer centric. They actually focus on leader. They really need to look outside and focus on new opportunities created by technology, created by customer unmet needs. They need to be customer obsessed. They need to be much more innovative and agile. So that's pretty much how they win. They need to recognize that one. And by the way, the 8 companies we study now is high-tech internet firms. But when I study traditional firms, when they're undergoing digital transformation, we see the same situation ongoing for other what we call more traditional industry as well, not only for high-tech. So how to win is different. And then the third question is how to organize. We always see there's a trend toward organizing around platforms, teams, and much more importantly, around ecosystem partners. We want to magnify our organizational capabilities, not only within our organization, but through our ecosystem partners as well. And finally, we also see there's a new kind of leadership that can transform and sustain the reinvention. Especially, they play the role much more on future strategists, organizational architects to redefine from traditional hierarchy to MOE. They define the new culture, much more customer-centric, much more focused on innovation, and they become a talent manager. And finally, they personally become much more resilient, learning-oriented, mission-driven, and much more importantly, they are able to navigate much more complex situations by managing paradox, short-term, long-term, top-down, bottom-up, divergence for brainstorming and convergence on execution. All those kind of things are much more complex. We find that all these kind of what we call MOE leaders need to have new set of roles and new set of competency.
Oh, thank you, Arthur. Unfortunately, we're moving towards the end of our program. That's the time bell ringing, right? So I'd just like to switch gears for a second and ask you about your own personal reading list. So what are you currently reading, and what books have you found inspiring recently?
Arthur, go ahead.
Well, actually, my personal learning is more not by reading books. My personal inspiration and learning is by talking to CEOs. I talk to CEOs a lot. And I find out that they have a lot of ongoing challenge, and I identify key organization problems. Like the book, Why We Do This Kind of Research for the book is similar. I identify the problems, and then based on that, I have much more targeted learning by benchmarking world-class companies in that area. I go deep and study how they're doing, and then I try to formulate some principle and try to resolve the problems that those CEOs I'm talking to and I'm helping with. So that's my key source of learning. Literature is part of my learning once I identify the problem.
Dave?
If I were to pick a book that has had the most influence on me, and this is not going to be an answer you've probably heard before, it's probably the Bible. I find that the messages that are in that book have lasted for thousands of years, and they've lasted for thousands of years because they're good messages. So I hope I spend a little bit of time every day and every week in that book. The other thing I do, and I know that's a very different answer and probably not one that's socially appropriate in some settings, but it's being very honest and transparent. I love to follow authors. I love to find somebody who's thoughtful and trace their work over time. And I'll name some. Jeffrey Pfeffer at Stanford, Linda Grattan at London Business School, Ed Lawler, Ram Charan. I really adore the ideas that they create and share. And all of those folks, and many others, Chester Elton, Whitney Johnson. These are people like Gary Hamel who haven't done one idea, but they continually learn and create new ideas. And I love to leech on to some of them. And that's one of the reasons it's a privilege to work with Arthur, because I think he has the capacity to continually regenerate ideas that have impact. Wow. So that's two very different answers. Yeah,
no, very good. And for me, one of the more inspiring books I've recently read is Reinventing the Organization. Thank you guys for that.
Thank you.
So this has really been a fascinating discussion. So Arthur and Dave, thank you for joining us and lending us and our listeners your insights.
It's our pleasure.
Thank you. It's our pleasure, and what a privilege. And we hope you see in the book as well the melding of East and West. Arthur is clearly the thought leader in China and in Asia around organizational issues. I've played with that a little more out of the West, and I hope that as we respect and learn from each other, the readers will sense This is a global issue, not a single country issue.
Right. Good point. Good
Yeah,
point.
good point. Yeah.
Well, and I'd like to thank our listeners too. And if you're interested in purchasing a copy of Arthur and Dave's book, Reinventing the Organization, it's available at all major book retailers, including Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And if you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to our off-the-shelf book discussion podcast series, or explore the entire catalog of podcast programming from the Conference Board by visiting our website at www.conference-board.org/podcasts. This is Chuck Mitchell from the Conference Board. Thanks for listening and thanks for joining us.